Welcome to the Pipeline Online Podcast. In this episode, we have Senator Pamela Wallin. Prime Minister Mark Carney made a big speech in Davos. President Trump didn't like it. There's a trade war, and the Conservatives had a convention. Is there an election coming? Senator Wallin is a Saskatchewan insider in Ottawa. Let's talk about it all and more. Hello, folks. We've got Senator Pamela Wallin, who everyone in Canada knows if they're at least over 30.
Yeah, that's a good comment. That's right.
And she's a Conservative senator in Ottawa. She's our insider in Ottawa for the podcast here.
It's an independent senator. I'm just saying for the record. Okay, there's different categories in there. Okay.
And we got Bronwyn, who just got back from Calgary from the Conservative Convention.
Great.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Senator.
Hi, how are you?
Bronwyn, do you want to kick it off here, starting maybe with China?
Well, you kicked it off with China. You take it away.
All right. So I guess a couple of weeks ago, Premier Scott Moe goes with Prime Minister Carney to China, and they go work out a trade deal, which brings a quick picture back here, which will allow China to actually sell these in Canada, only 49,000 of them, this electric vehicle. And as a result, we will remove the 100% tariff that we applied because the United States asked us to apply that because they don't like Chinese vehicles. China had put a very punishing 100% tariff on canola, which cost people enormous amounts of money. And canola is the big cash crop in Saskatchewan. I think we got a little bit of it here, maybe. Yeah, there you go. And the result was, Quick Dick McDick himself said that he lost $100,000. Like, that's a lot of money because of his trade issue. So Carney's there, Moe's there, they get a deal. And let's take it from there, Senator.
Well, I think a lot of people have questions. I've done a couple of podcasts in the last few weeks about the Prime Minister's trip to China, the agreement with China. It was interesting because he called it a trade agreement. And then when he came back, a lot of his cabinet ministers were sent out to say it wasn't really a trade agreement. We were just solving some of those trade irritants. But then the Prime Minister, sitting with the premiers again the other day, said, no, it's a trade deal. So it's a trade deal, and it comes at quite a cost. As several of the people that I've talked to have explained, these Chinese EVs, although they're less money than a Tesla, are also spy machines on wheels. That's the phrase that is used. And we've now allowed that into the Canadian sector, and they'll be able to collect and download data directly back home in China. So that's an issue. The canola deal also has a time limit on it. So we'll see if that is worth the price that we've paid. I find it a little strange that the Prime Minister continues to talk about China being on the leading edge of the fight toward net zero. These folks have more new coal operations opened in any given week than we can even count. So if he looks at China as an environmental partner, I'm a little surprised on that. And I'm truly troubled by looking at China as a security partner, which is the other side of the deal.
So diplomatically, Senator, two things. One, I guess, most noteworthy from those conversations in China was the use of the phrase New World Order.
Right.
Like to get your thoughts on that. Was that really necessary if we're talking about whether it was an agreement or a year-long arrangement? Did he have to go that far on the New World Order talk? And I guess the second thing would be how you think this puts us into position as KUSMA talks now are getting going.
New world order is one of those phrases it's in the eye of the beholder or the ear of the beholder, because if people have been watching what goes on in Davos over the years, this is a gathering of elite influencers and decision makers and power brokers, not all of them presidents and prime ministers, but a good chunk of them. And New World Order has always kind of signaled quietly that there is a group of people who are smarter than the rest of us, and they'll decide how the world unfolds. And I don't think that's been completely dispelled. So it was a signal, certainly, to the Prime Minister's European friends and the elite among the group that gather there, that he's still on side with many of the meetings that he's been in attendance in over the years. He was their leader on many fronts, on the GFANs, on the financing for energy projects, etc. So I think he was kind of trying to play both sides, which is, I'm going to create this energy superpower back at home, and that's for the domestic audience, but don't worry, the environment is still front and center here in our discussions. It comes at a huge cost, I think, in terms of the timing. Everybody, if you look at the public opinion polls today, the Canadian public agrees with Mark Carney that, by and large, that people need to stand up to that bully in the US, and they need to tell Donald Trump to back off, and we need to find other trading partners. Those are maybe true things. Here's the problem. We do 78% of our trade with the United States of America. So until we have all those new partnerships lined up, it's risky to kiss the bird in the hand goodbye. And we also, despite all the talk about delivering our product, our goods to new markets, we still have the fundamental issues. We need to be able to get it out of the ground and off the ground, if I'm thinking about agricultural products. And we need to do that with different rules and regulations, because many of the problem pieces of legislation are still in place. Bill 69, Bill 48, emission standards, all of those things are still essentially there. So even if you could get it out of the ground, then we need to get it to one side of the country or the other to deliver it to all these new markets, real and promised. And we can't do that either. We just saw the Nutrien case where they were looking for a way to export their product. They opted to build an export terminal in the US and not in Canada. So, there's a lot of, if you're going to do these things, let's at least do it in the right order. And that we have not done.
So, Premier Wall, actually, former Premier Wall, sent me an email here a few days ago, and he said, "Brian, this is really burning me up here." He had written a column which I ran, and it got a lot of attention. And he basically said, "What you're saying is that, look, we cannot lose sight of the fact that 78% of our trade goes to the south, and that Trump is only going to be here for a few more years. We've got to keep our eye on that ball." And I was thinking about that just yesterday. I live 6 miles from the U.S. border. And, so wheat and stuff that can be produced here and shipped for processing down south, or oil that goes through the pipelines that goes through Enbridge, all the oil in Southeast Saskatchewan goes by pipe to Enbridge into the United States. It is a very long way to get anything from here on a ship to Vancouver, or in Vancouver, or in Prince Rupert, or even Thunder Bay, or Halifax. I mean, the natural tendency has always been and always will be for continental trade as opposed to international trade.
Yeah, I mean, those are the natural connections. We all know that. You have proximity, but in fact, most of the Canadian population lives within 100 miles of the US border, from coast to coast, right? This is actually true. We're there for weather, and we're there for proximity, and all of those things. So that is, the Americans are always going to be are friends and allies and trading partners and neighbors. It's just it's geography, and it's also years, centuries of history. So that's true. And this notion that, and I think this is where the real debate is coming over Davos, sort of the rupture theory, which is the world as we know it has come to an end and it's never ever going to be the same ever again, versus Donald Trump has been elected. He's probably going to get his wings clipped in the midterms, which are coming soon. And this is his second term. So there may or may not even be another Republican or MAGA, trending government. There may be a different kind of Republican, or there may be a Democrat. We have had so many trade battles and points of difference with the Americans over the years. When I lived and worked in New York, it was in the days just after 9/11. And Canada had not yet really responded and did not go into Iraq and all of those things. The Americans believed that the terrorists, the 9/11 terrorists, had come through a porous Canadian border. That proved not to be true. But there's a lot of people who still believe that. And we spent our entire time in New York trying to make sure that that border stayed open and that the money and the trade and the investment flowed. That's only, that's 25 years ago. It's not like in the 1800s. We have constant debates and differences, which we should, with our neighbors.
General?
Sorry?
Weren't you consul general in on?
Yeah, I was in consul general in New York, and that is kind of the job is a little bit like small a ambassador to Wall Street. You have to worry about the money flowing. So, these battles come and go, and people can have huge differences with Donald Trump and hate him vehemently and all of those things. It just doesn't matter in terms of the linkages between our two countries, which are crucially important to us. They're important to them. And it's in our best interest because of not just the dollars and cents for trade, but our defense and security. We're in no position to, at this point, defend the Arctic, defend ourselves. We haven't even made 2% yes in terms of our percentage of GDP commitment to defense. So we've got a lot of work to do. And, it would be, I think, in our interest just to keep a working relationship working.
I agree. I also think, that there is a certain irony to, the statement that Prime Minister Carney made in Davos about, a rules-based world. I mean, rules-based, of course, to your point about, what Davos has always been about, which is a bunch of elitists talking about what rules-based means to them, has traditionally meant, Canada freeloading to a certain extent, from Canadian perspective, even I suppose from, more than I suppose from NATO's perspective. I mean, it's been a very comfortable ride, when it comes to defense and to a certain extent trade, because, while of course we've been great contributors and there has been a lot of, back and forth in every sense, we have become overly reliant on it and complacent in terms of our own red tape, regulation, productivity, and general economic well-being. And so I think, and I found in Davos, this talk about how Canada is like Václav Havel. That should be much more criticized. How is the, this champion who took on communism, somehow Canada in terms of, in what sense? We have gone in eyes wide open on not investing in defense, gone in eyes wide open on undermining our own energy sector, productivity, economy. I found that, should be much more taken on than it's been, and it's taken on as some kind of wildly intellectual thing, which is what Carney always gets. And I find it
and he's been criticized by many for kind of misinterpreting or misusing those statements. But yes, it is how he speaks and how he likes to speak. But honestly, as you have noted, rules are what exactly we need. That's what FTA was about. It's what NAFTA is about, and it's what we call now KUSMA, because we're all using different names to describe this, but the Canada, US, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. We are entering a crucial stage. The Prime Minister says we've done all our homework, and we're waiting for the other parties to tell us that the discussions are going to begin formally. We need rules. We need those protections because we're the smaller player in the deal. Anybody who is the smaller player, it doesn't matter if you're in business, if you've got a partnership that's 51-49, then the guy that has 51 has a bigger say than the guy that has 49. And our numbers are not even close to that. So we do need rules, and it troubles me to see the deal that we've got jeopardized. There's a lot of people are sort of saying, well, who cares? We've got what they need and they'll have to do business with us one way or the other. I remember the world before free trade. I remember the concerns we all had when first the Liberals proposed this, or a Liberal, Donald MacDonald, and then Brian Mulroney took it up, and he was roundly and soundly criticized for entering into these negotiations. The protections that those deals have afforded us over the years have been very important. Are they perfect? No. Do we still have issues over softwood lumber on the West Coast? Do we have all of these battles? Of course we do. But it's not just the Americans that we're doing battle with. And I've actually had conversations with people in the last couple of weeks about this. They thought the canola tariffs were imposed by the United States because it was just the tariff wars that are going on. And Donald Trump is always talking about tariffs. And you have to explain, no, this is why the meeting had to take place in China, right? So I think there's a little misunderstanding about how important it is to have independent arbiters look at these questions as they come up when there's a battle, but just to have that flow of trade and to say, let's make sure we continue to do this and that we have rules in place that allow us to do it. It's just too important to the Canadian economy.
We're just going to go to a commercial break here, folks. We'll be back in 30 seconds. So, Senator, I was thinking here, again, refresh my memory that you were Consul General. The next part of our list here is Trump's response. He goes to Davos and basically makes a very threatening comment to Prime Minister Carney. And then, it's all hell breaks loose again. And I'm wondering, if you were in your old capacity, what would you be telling the Prime Minister in going into a KUSMA negotiation?
Well, it's what I said earlier, is that politics always are key and core in these kinds of discussions. But if we have not learned a few things about Donald Trump since 2016, then we're not paying attention. As you just referenced, there was going to be 100% tariffs on everything every day for the rest of our lives. He says things in the heat of the moment. He goes on Truth Social and pronounces on this and that, and everybody does need to take a beat. And I would even agree that the Prime Minister Carney was right to take a beat instead of responding to everything in real time. And I just think we have to be aware that, everyone is playing politics. The comments from President Trump on the 51st state helped Mr. Carney get elected. There's no question about that. And the pollsters have discerned that. And we all know that. So it is not unhelpful for him politically here at home when President Trump goes off on a rant and a rave or a Truth Social binge. It is who he is. And that is the person at the other end of the table. And that's just reality. A lot of these things, most of these 99% of the negotiations go on with neither Trump nor Carney in the room. And so I don't think I think we need to be realistic about that. So let's just, understand that there's a lot riding on this. They're our largest trading partner. Everybody's going to play a little politics from time to time. Donald Trump is not going to change his personality or his MO. So let's just incorporate that in terms of how we deal and carry on. Just everybody simmer down. But if you want to use it for political purposes yourself, then you're going to have to appreciate that he's going to do the same.
And of course, the problem with playing politics on this, and even to a certain extent, flirting with who cares, as you said, in that attitude that's out there, is that it's already, there are really significant impacts on working people in this country. I mean, in Ontario, and we were talking before we went on the air about how generally loved Prime Minister Carney is in central Canada. And yet, I mean, these, the auto sector has been already severely hit in communities in Ontario. And you would think that that would create more of an urgency to the KUSMA reality, which Prime Minister Carney faces, rather than, to a certain extent, flirting with other partners. I don't know what you think about, I mean, you reference how the positions that President Trump has taken have benefited Carney to a certain extent politically, benefited him in terms of getting elected. Do you think that we are looking at an election? I mean, if you put on your political observer hat, in the nearer term, because KUSMA is really not looking good from Canada's perspective, is that too politics?
Well, I think what must be going on inside the minds of Liberal strategists at this point is a question of timing. There's a minority government. It's they're hoping that there could be another floor crosser here or that. We heard the media speculating about that at the convention, which I don't think there was much substance to it there. But that's an issue. Minority governments always risk losing that. So the question is, do you want to make that decision on timing, or do you want the opposition parties to make the decision on timing? And there's the kind of being boxed in by a Quebec election and other things that are on the horizon. So you could make the argument that, call the election now while there's still hope and promise. You can blame all the bad stuff on Donald Trump, and if it wasn't for his tariffs, the world as we know it would be better. We would sell our produce or our products. We would be an energy superpower. We would, have all of those things. The price of food would go down because of supply. You can see the campaign there. The downside is, of course, and this is what political strategists are paid to think about, is you never know what's going to happen in the middle of an election campaign. And there could be some surprise event, some black swan event that nobody's even contemplated right now, that could change the circumstances. I think Pierre Poilievre came out of his weekend convention strengthened by the high number in terms of support. I think more importantly, it's about his own confidence and ability to focus again, instead of, worrying about the survival issue. That's, I think, been put to rest. But, he's, I think, going to ready himself, as he rightly should. They've got money in their coffers. And so I think the decision is really in Liberal hands about that fine line between using this circumstance where you can really hang a lot of the problems and issues that people are experiencing on Donald Trump before people start saying, but yes, you've been in office now a year, or now you've been in office for a year and a half. Where are the results? Why aren't the projects started? Why isn't the money flowing? Why aren't the pipelines being built? That may too be a little bit unrealistic in terms of the timing, but that's how voters respond, which is, what have you done for me lately? And so it's a fine line figuring out where the answer is still in the Prime Minister's favor.
So, Bronwyn, you were just at the convention, just got back, and in the next segment here after the ad, I want to talk a bit about Alberta separation, Quebec separation. Are we going to have a country a year from now? Let's get into that. So it's going to go to an ad here. So, Bronwyn, you were there. Were people actually talking about separation of Alberta? I mean, it was mostly Albertans, or?
Well, I mean, Pierre Poilievre brought it up, and I think he brought it up in an interesting context, and you'll have seen that too, Senator. He talked about how when the Liberals are in power, that separatism always looms large,
Yeah.
and that's interesting. I mean, so in the Quebec context, I mean, we see that coming up again, and obviously now, more and more with Alberta. I think there is, he acknowledged that. There is a great deal of disgruntlement at the West's continued status, and that's why we see that. And Senator, you were raising before we went on. I mean, and Pierre Poilievre, made similar points that what we see from Carney is talk. And just a lot of talk. Everyone seems happy with that. I mean, nothing really is advancing. Of course, it takes some time with projects, but a lot of it is, announcements, re-announcements, former announcements about moving things forward. Whereas the fundamentals, as you pointed out, remain on the books. And I think that's really was top of mind at the convention and those listening to the speech. I mean, we see the key fundamental regulatory hurdles still in place.
Right.
A lot of anti-energy policies still in place. And I guess, in terms even of the MOU between Ottawa and Alberta, some things that Albertans weren't super thrilled about. I mean, the increasing of the industrial carbon tax, for example, the increase of the methane emissions threshold, and all this patchwork of regulatory approvals, which create, if anything, more uncertainty rather than less. So, in answer to your question, Brian, and like to get your views, Senator, on the convention and the speech, and maybe the sense out there about alienation. I think that there was facing that head on to a certain extent around what's driving some of this continued alienation or renewed alienation under Liberal PM.
It's been around for a very long time. As a young reporter, one of the first stories I covered was the the implementation of the National Energy Program. And I remember going out to talk to one Peter Lougheed at that point, who talked and then spent the rest of his political career dealing with these issues. There is such a lack of understanding, and in some cases misunderstanding, and in some cases more deliberate than that, between the East and the West. And I mean central Canada, not the Far East. The Maritimes, the Atlantic provinces have many similar issues with different resources. There is a sense of alienation. There is a sense that people do not understand or appreciate what the resource sector, and by that I also include agriculture and forestry and all of those things, what this all contributes to the country. It's about 15% of our national GDP. This is not to be trifled with. And they, in as much as everybody says Ontario is the industrial heartland and all of that, and that's why they have population and that kind of power because of it, we are the providers of the resources that are so crucial. As a kid, when you think about all the wheat getting on the trains and being shipped to central Canada and turned into bread and sent back, or into flour and bread, these things are long-standing. But I think in recent times, the whole environmental agenda is really put forward by Justin Trudeau more powerfully. We had the whole battle between climate ideology and economic reality, and that's where those things always clash. And then again, you've always got politics overlaid. I mean, I don't think, I shouldn't attribute motive, so I won't, but it was it was interesting to watch David Eby at the Premier's meeting invoke the word treason to describe the separatist sentiment in Alberta. Of course, people who work actively to break up a country, technically, I guess you could say, could be described that way. But these are not people taking up arms against their country. These are people who are trying to use the democratic process. Yes, for those of us who want Canada to stay together, this is concerning and this is troubling. And I, I certainly don't envy Danielle Smith having to walk the line she's walking there, which is saying to people, yes, you're entitled to have a voice and use the instruments of democracy, but also, trying very much to keep the country together. So we are at, it's a very difficult time right now because in a sense, Carney has raised the expectations again by saying, I'm going to be different. I'm going to change some of the rules. Here I am signing this agreement with Danielle Smith. We are going to be an energy superpower, all of those things. And people really have their hopes up thinking, okay, maybe he will actually do this. Maybe he will change the rules sufficiently. And there's a lot of signals that way, a lot of important signals, setting up the major projects office and all of these things. But we need something a little bit more than signals. Now, I know there are some deals coming, and I know that, there's a deal with India coming soon with uranium, and there's things like that. There's discussions about LNG. There is a lot of activity, but the pipeline has kind of become the shorthand in the symbol. And if it's not going to be the shorthand in the symbol, in addition to representing an actual legitimate way to get our resources to tidewater, as they say, then expectations need to be managed better than they're being managed.
And I'll just say, I talked to a lawyer in Calgary who shall remain nameless, but very, very influential in terms of some of the energy projects in this country, which we've seen. And her point was that the Indigenous component, UNDRIP, UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, with that idea of free, prior, and informed consent, and so these are. She said that is one of the most potentially insurmountable problem which we face in terms of energy approvals in this country, major projects approvals. And she is a fan of Carney's. From on a personal level, and feels that the major projects office is a good thing, and feels that. It will see progress, but even she was admitting that we have a lot of ingrained issues regulatorily, in terms of federal environmental regulation, but also with that Indigenous approval issue, which is really challenging. One thing is with the pipeline, Senator, I'd like to get your thoughts on, I guess, where you see one going. I know something that scrolled across the bottom of my screen, I think it was yesterday, it was kind of intriguing to see that Premier Smith was musing about how this might not now be a northwest route, which I thought was fascinating. And what, if anything, she's potentially signaling, or what you think is being signaled. And Brian, I know you posted on the weekend about Canoe and his musings about the Churchill line, let's call it. Where do you see this most tangibly going, and where do you think it, at least one pipeline has to go?
Well, I do think it came up. It was raised by reporters at a press conference, but it is raised because of the Indigenous issue, and whether we're talking about consultation or whether we're talking about a veto. Are we going to get consent, and at what cost? And, a lot of people have said to me, looking at what's happened in BC and the town of Richmond, where courts have ruled. Now, I know that doesn't apply across the country because it has fewer treaties in British Columbia, but that is kind of underneath that, and that is in the Prime Minister's bailiwick, to be clear. And we've again got some mixed signals from Ottawa on whether they believe and subscribe to the notion that Indigenous groups, and I don't mean this amorphous coastal groups, that I mean with
it isn't a real band.
yes, tribes and groups, if they essentially have a veto or not, because we've heard different things on that. So that goes to that question of, is there a route that somebody could find somewhere that would be easier, right? I think that's why the question was raised. Does it have to go that particular direct? Could we find another place? And
I think just to clarify here, the premier basically said Kitimat's out. So Kitimat was the original plan for Northern Gateway, but she said we need to be on the coast where you don't have to go down a channel. Now that was always problematic doing Kitimat because you had to go like 100 or 200 kilometers tied onto a tugboat through a narrow channel.
Right.
Whereas Prince Rupert is a left turn, a right turn, and you're on open ocean. And she basically described that. She said, just a short thing to get out onto the open ocean. So she all but said Prince Rupert without saying Prince Rupert. Now, some people say that just past the island there, while you're still in the Hecate Strait, or however you pronounce it, it's like 50 miles wide. That's not a narrow channel. I mean, it's open ocean as far as I'm concerned.
And that whole issue has been, overblown anyway. The whole, tanker ban and all of those things. Technology has changed, the double hull ships, all of that stuff.
And GPS and all that other stuff.
Yeah. So no, I think at this point, I don't know, my sense is when I listen to this, you're of course technically right. I think what she's trying to signal overall is, let's do something. And I think she's just, if we could just get the discussion started around something specific, and people in fairness look back at her and say, okay, we'll get some proponents around the table and then we'll talk. But I think it is just, there's some of those basic questions about who has a veto on this. I think Premier EB has agreed that he doesn't really. He knows that. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have mechanisms to fight. And we've seen so much activism over the last 20 or 30 years on the environmental side that it's still not going to prevent people from testing it in court, even though, we've had rulings on it in the past. So I think that's where we're at this point, is just, let's get a meeting underway somewhere, and both sides need to bring something to the table to get to that next point.
I was talking to someone yesterday who I know very well, and he's originally a Saskatchewan boy, now working in Alberta and BC, doing pipeline work. And he was telling me, the attitude there right now is that if they don't have a pipeline permit by June 1st, they're going to walk. As in, the separation thing should not be ignored. They are going to declare a republic or whatever it is. They are done. And he pointed out, how can we have some of the richest resources in the world, which should be one of the richest provinces, richest countries, and you have to wait 3 years for a knee surgery? What is going on? And the reality is that I heard from people who know much better than I that the polling for a separation in Saskatchewan is actually 2 points higher than it is in Alberta. And, I keep seeing on my social media, there are lineups down the block in all these different communities in Alberta to sign this petition. This is a real thing. And I got to know, Senator, in Ottawa, are they actually taking it seriously, or are they just like, whatever?
Well, it's not my sense that they really are. And that generally starts with the media in terms of whether they're signaling to anybody that this is an issue. Everybody has, for decades, taken the Quebec issue very seriously. And I don't dispute that. It's just that I don't think people see the cultural differences so clearly when the language is the same. And so it's harder for people to get their head around. Yes, there is a different view of the world in parts of Western Canada. I don't like the phrase Western Canada because, it's not a monolith, but there is a very different cultural and just approach work ethic and community, they're all different. They're different depending on where you are in this country. And I do think there needs to be an appreciation that this sentiment is real. I don't know how large it is. I mean, I just don't have any sense of that right now. I know those who feel it very strongly. And they have a lot of evidence on their side to present in terms of how they as individuals have come to this position, which is, we gave it one more shot. We thought there might be a little hope here. We thought that Carney would be different than Trudeau, and they don't feel it and they don't see it. And I think, some of the statements that we've already talked about today, New World Order, all of those things have been triggers for people again. They're many of them are just as critical of Pierre Poilievre as they are of the Liberals, which is, there were times when the Conservatives were in office, they could have done something, all of that. So I'm not going to dismiss it. I won't. I have that conversation with colleagues, and I can only hope that it's not reduced to the kicker story, which finds somebody with a big cowboy hat that's kicking the dirt and say, oh, well, we don't need to worry about that, right? Because it is a bit of a caricature that the media is presenting at this point.
And I think to that point and the politics of it, I mean, if there were, let's say, I mean, if the EV type comments could be toned down and the media caricaturing could be reduced, and there could be a more honest look at what we all know, which is that the energy strength or resource potential strength of Saskatchewan and Alberta was thwarted, way back, because it was recognized that it was such a force to be reckoned with. So just the historical reality of that. I don't know if Canadians really understand that. And the fact that, we've talked about Ontario in the course of this conversation, have not province. Quebec and Ontario benefiting from, our resource wealth and being literally fueled by it. And I think that you're absolutely right on the caricaturing. I also do find that it to that point, whenever, Quebec separatism has reared its head, I just highly doubt that Evie would make such comments, or people would make those same comments about Quebec, because it's a much more, reverential political discussion than it is when it's about the West. And right there goes to some of the reasons for that frustration. I mean, as for speaking with foreign powers, I mean, unfortunate, I guess, but it's not as if Quebec separatists didn't talk to the Basques and the Scots and all those years they were musing and plotting separation themselves. I mean, so it's really just very unfortunate that we hold and certain players hold one part of the country in really a great deal of contempt.
Yeah,
I think
we got to wrap it up here
go
pretty
ahead.
quick. I just want to ask you here one last question before we wrap up, because I know you got to take off. What's the one thing we're not talking about that we should be?
You mean in our country?
However you want to frame that, yeah.
No, I think that Bronwyn was just hitting on the point that I think, and I've spent an awful lot of time in Ottawa in all sorts of capacities. Since the mid-'70s, I've been in and out of the nation's capital as a reporter and a journalist, and sitting in the Senate and all these different incarnations. And we genuinely do have a lack of understanding between the West and Central Canada. There is a lack. Part of that is a question of representation. There are fewer numbers of us out there, but just the way the Constitution has set out how many MPs, how many senators, that kind of thing. It has to do with time zones. I don't know how many elections were decided in this country before votes were even counted in Western Canada. That seems trite, and people dismiss it and say, what difference does it make? We live in the world of iPhones and all the rest of it. it goes to the core. If you feel dismissed, if you feel that your issues don't matter, you're not always going to stand up and scream and say, look at me, listen to me, hear me, all of that. Sometimes in those situations, and it's in any kind of relationship, whether it's a workplace or a personal relationship of some kind, if you feel disrespected or unheard or whatever phrase you want to use, at a certain point you go quiet and just kind of carry on with your life as you see it, and you separate, and I know I'm using a pejorative word and I'm trying not to, but you distance yourself from that person that's making you feel that way. You protect yourself. It's instinct. And I think that's what we're starting to see. There are these, the public comments, but I think I'm much more concerned about the many people that are feeling left out and are feeling that they are not part of this, I'm going to say New World Order with a small n and a small w and a small o, that they're not part of that world, and they want to be, because they believe they have a lot to offer, and they do, and the facts back them up. So, I don't want to get to, do some psychodrama here, but I think we know this in our personal lives, how it feels when you're being ignored. And that's a dangerous thing. So I wish that is the conversation we were having. To your point, Bron, when you said, people were reverential, and they were, in the discussions about Quebec separation. This would be the end of the world as we know it. We are all going to get on buses and go to Quebec, and we're going to tell people how much we love them and that they need to be part of it, and they're a founding part of this country, and it's important. I think sometimes other parts of the country need to hear a little bit of that as well. Not, yeah, go ahead. Just see how you do. You're a landlocked province, good luck to you. That's not the conversation we should be having.
Well, for that, thank you very much, folks, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future, Senator.
Yeah, great pleasure to be with you too. And thanks for caring as much as you do and always putting these issues on the table. I know you've been with me on my podcasts, and I'm glad to be with you because we've got to keep having this conversation.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you.
Great to see you.